Get your hands where I can see them, boy. Both of you. You think this is your county? You think you can just sit in a place like this and breathe my air?
His face twisted in pure disgust as he intentionally slammed a heavy hand onto the breakfast table. Spilling hot coffee all over Solomon Reed's flannel shirt, the diner went dead silent. 8 people watched a man in a uniform decide that 2 black men eating breakfast were a problem that needed solving.
Officer, we are just having breakfast.
Solomon said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Tanner let out a harsh, mocking laugh, leaning directly into Solomon's face.
Oh, we got a smart one. Let me tell you something, boy. People like you don't belong in my county, running your mouth like you actually have rights. Out here, I'm the law. This badge says I decide who's a citizen, and today, you're just another animal going in my cage.
With a brutal shove, Tanner slammed Solomon against the concrete wall, forcing his face into the dust while throwing his wallet into the dirt. But Tanner didn't look inside that wallet. If he had, he would have seen the federal credentials. He had no idea that in exactly 46 minutes, this exact black man he was putting in chains was supposed to be standing in a marble courtroom downtown, taking an oath as the newly confirmed United States Attorney for the entire district. You think that's the part that's going to wreck you? Just wait. Because that badge Wade Tanner kept polishing was about to become the most expensive piece of tin in the state. Welcome to Black Stories, where dignity meets justice. If you're ready to see exactly how a small-town tyrant cuffed the absolute wrong man and watched his entire life burn down on a random Tuesday, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's get into the road to Pell Creek. Let me tell you how 2 brothers ended up at that diner. Because to understand what happened on that gravel lot, you have to understand what they were carrying with them when they walked in. The drive started before dawn. Solomon Reed had picked up his younger brother Isaiah at 4:30 in the morning. Headlights cutting through the dark. 2 cups of gas station coffee sweating in the cup holders. They didn't talk much for the first hour. They never did. The Reed brothers had grown up in a house where silence was a language, where their mother could say don't with a look and their father could say I love you by tightening a tie before church. They were comfortable in the quiet. They were driving out to see their mother. Eunice Reed was 81 years old, and she was dying. Not the dramatic kind, the slow kind, the kind where the body forgets. One small function at a time. How to keep going. She'd been moved 3 weeks earlier into a care facility just outside the county line. A low brick building with a wheelchair ramp and a magnolia tree out front. And Solomon had driven out the night before to sit with her. Because the next day, this day, he wasn't going to have time. This day, Solomon Reed was being sworn in as the United States Attorney for the district. 11 days earlier, the Senate had confirmed him, 51 to 48. He'd watched the vote on a muted television in his office. Hands folded, face still. The way he watched everything. The first black man ever to hold the office in that district. The headline writers had made a meal of it. Solomon had made nothing of it. He'd called his mother, and his mother had cried. And that was the only celebration he'd allowed himself. Now he and Isaiah were driving back toward the city for the ceremony. Scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp at the federal courthouse, where a federal judge would administer the oath, and a room full of people who doubted him would clap politely, and a photographer would take the picture that would hang on a wall somewhere for the next 100 years. Solomon's suit was hanging in the back seat, sealed in a garment bag, pressed sharp. He was driving in an old flannel shirt and jeans because his mother had once told him, "You don't wear your good clothes on the highway. You wear them when you get where you're going." And Eunice Reed's rules outlived every law school he'd ever attended. On the seat between them sat a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. It was their father's pocket watch. Cornelius Reed had been dead 19 years. He'd been a sharecropper's son who'd taught himself to read at a kitchen table by lamplight, who'd become a deacon and then a pastor, who'd raised 2 boys to believe that the law was a promise the country had made and was someday going to keep. He'd carried that watch every day of his adult life. Brass case, worn smooth. A hairline crack across the face. The watch didn't run anymore. It had stopped a long time ago. And the hand sat frozen at 11:42. 11:42 on the night of August 9th. 1979. That was the night a Tillman County deputy pulled Cornelius Reed over on a back road for what the report called suspicion. Dragged him out of his car in front of his pregnant wife. Broke 2 of his ribs and the watch in his vest pocket with the same swing of a flashlight. And then wrote it up as resisting arrest. Cornelius had filed a complaint. The complaint had come back stamped with 3 words. Insuffisante évidence. Closed. He never got his day. He never got an apology. He carried that broken watch for the rest of his life. Stopped at 11:42. And every so often he'd take it out and look at it and say to his sons, "Justice in this country runs slow. Boys, slow as cold molasses. But it runs. You make sure it runs." When Cornelius died, Solomon took the watch. He'd been carrying it ever since. He never fixed it. He told people he liked the reminder. What he didn't tell people was that he wound the empty mechanism every single morning anyway. Out of a bid. Out of something like faith. A man winding a watch that would never tell time again. Because his father had asked him to make the clock run. So that's what was sitting on the seat between the 2 brothers as they came down Highway 41, a little after 9 in the morning. Hungry. Tired. An hour from the ceremony, a broken watch. Frozen on the worst night of their family's history. And up ahead, glowing in the morning haze, was a hand-painted sign. The copper kettle. Breakfast all day. Pull over. Isaiah said. Mama's place didn't feed me and I'm not raising my right hand on an empty stomach. You're not the one raising your hand. Solomon said. I'm raising it in spirit. Isaiah grinned. Pull over. Sol. 20 minutes. You've got time. He had time. That was the cruelest part of the whole thing. When Solomon thought about it later, he had time. 46 minutes of it. He flipped the blinker and turned in. The copper kettle was the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu or its wallpaper since the Carter administration. Vinyl booths the color of dried blood. A counter with chrome stools. A pie case that hummed. The smell of bacon grease soaked so deep into the walls it had become part of the building's character. A bell over the door that jingled when the brothers walked in. Every head turned. It was a small thing. People look up when a door opens. But Solomon Reed had spent 54 years in the rural South. And he knew the difference between looking and measuring. This was measuring. The cook in the back, a thick man with forearms like fence posts, looked up from the griddle and held his gaze a second too long. A pair of old men at the counter in seed company caps swiveled, looked, and turned slowly back to their eggs. A trucker in the corner glanced over the top of a newspaper. A young waitress with her hair pulled back, and a name tag that said Darlene froze for half a beat with a coffee pot in her hand. Then everybody went back to their breakfast. The needle of the room moved a degree and settled. Isaiah didn't notice. Or pretended not to. He slid into the corner booth, the one with the good view of the lot. Force of habit, from a man who'd grown up, being told to always know where the exits were and grabbed a laminated menu. They got biscuits and gravy. He said happily. Sol. Biscuits and gravy. You can take the federal job, but you cannot take the country out of me. Solomon sat down across from him. He folded his hands on the table. He looked, for a moment, at his brother, at this big, warm, overgrown kid who taught American history to 9th graders in a school with broken air conditioning and a 40-year-old textbook, who'd cried at their father's funeral so hard he couldn't speak. who still called Solomon Big Bro at 41 years old. "You proud of me?" Solomon asked. He almost never asked anything like that. Isaiah looked up, surprised. Then his face went soft. "Sol," he said. "Daddy would have." He stopped. He had to stop. His jaw worked. "Daddy would have worn that watch to your ceremony and held it up the whole time so he could check it against the clock. Just to be petty about it." Solomon laughed. "A real one." It surprised them both. Darlene came over with the coffee pot. Up close, she looked tired. Mid-30s. A small cross on a chain. A wedding ring worn thin. She poured for both of them without being asked. "Y'all know what you want. Or you need a minute." "Biscuits and gravy," Isaiah said. "And an order of bacon. And you got grits. This is the South." "Sugar." "Then grits." "And you?" she asked Solomon. "2 eggs. Over medium. Wheat toast." "Thank you." "Darling." She blinked. Just slightly. At the thank you. Darlene at the politeness. The eye contact. The using of her name. Like it had been a while. "Coming right up," she said. And went, for about 6 minutes. It was just 2 brothers in a booth. Isaiah talked. He talked about his students. About a kid named Deshaun who'd written an essay about Reconstruction. So good Isaiah had read it out loud in the teacher's lounge. He talked about the air conditioning. He talked about whether Solomon was going to have to start wearing better ties now. Because federal ties, Sol, those are some serious ties. Solomon listened. Mostly. And checked his watch, his wristwatch. Not the broken one at 11 minutes past 9. He had time. The bell over the door jingled. 2 deputies walked in, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it before anything happened. That's the thing people who haven't lived it don't understand. The room knew. The old men at the counter got very interested in their plates. Darlene's shoulders came up around her ears. The cook stopped scraping the griddle. The lead deputy was a big man. Maybe 50. With a sunburned neck and a gray mustache and a gut that hung over a belt heavy with gear. His name tag said Tanner. He moved through the diner like he owned the deed to it, nodding at the old men, calling the cook Earl, reaching over the counter to snag a strip of bacon off a plate that wasn't his, and eating it standing up. The younger one trailed behind him, 26. 27. Soft in the face. Eager. Namatak Braut. A man who clearly modeled his entire personality on the man in front of him. Tanner's eyes swept the room. Abit. The same measuring Solomon had felt when he walked in, and they stopped on the corner booth. Solomon felt it land. He'd felt it 1,000 times. He kept his eyes on his coffee. He'd learned that lesson before he learned to drive. Don't give them a reason. Don't give them anything. "Earl," Tanner said, still looking at the booth. "You serving anybody now?" The cook didn't answer. Tanner walked over. Slow. Boots loud on the linoleum. Pruitt drifted behind him. Thumb hooked in his belt. Tanner stopped at the end of the booth and stood there. Close enough that Isaiah had to lean back to look up at him. "Morning," Solomon said. "Avon." "Pleasant." Tanner ignored him. He looked at the plates that weren't there yet. The coffee cups. The menus. "Y'all from around here? We're passing through," Solomon said. "Passing through." Tanner said it like the words tasted bad. "Passing through to where?" "The city. We've got business this morning." "Business?" Pruitt snorted behind him. "What kind of business does a man like you have in the city?" Tanner asked. His eyes moved over Solomon's flannel shirt. His stubble. His work-worn hands. Cataloging. Deciding. "Let me guess. Deputy," Solomon said. Gently. "We're just having breakfast. We'll be out of your way directly." "Did I say you were in my way?" Tanner's voice climbed. Did I say that I asked you a question? That a crime now? Asking a man a question in my own county. He leaned a hand on the table. Into Solomon's space. Whose truck is that out front, the Silverado? It's mine. Yours. Tanner straightened up and looked at Pruitt, and they shared a look. A private little joke. The look of two men who already knew the punchline. Funny. Because a truck like that. Clean. New tires, Cody. What'd we pull last week off a fella that turned out to be moving product down 41? Silverado. Pruitt said helpfully. Silverado. Tanner nodded. Like a case had been made. Step on out of the booth. Both of you. Slow. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Solomon saw it. Saw his brother's hand flatten on the table. Saw the muscle jump in his cheek. Don't. Solomon thought, as loud as he could think it. Isaiah. Don't, officer. Solomon said. And his voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now. A foundation. Am I being detained? Because if you're detaining us, I'd like to know the reason. And if you're not, we'd like to finish our coffee. The room went dead silent. Wade Tanner turned his full attention onto Solomon for the first time. And something moved in his face, not doubt. Solomon would think later. Never doubt. Something worse. Insult. The pure, animal insult of a man who has decided you are nothing. Hearing you use a full sentence. Hearing you use the word detained. Hearing you, of all people, talk to him like you had rights. Oh, Tanner said softly. We got a smart one. You could hear. In those 4 words. The exact moment the morning turned. Because there's a particular thing that happens to a certain kind of man, when a black man he's decided is nothing dares to sound educated. It isn't fear, and it isn't even really anger. It's offense, the deep, ancient offense of a man who needs the world arranged a certain way. Hearing it refuse. Wade Tanner had needed the world arranged a certain way for 50 years. And Solomon Reed had just, very politely, declined to stay in his place in it. From that second on, it was never going to be about a truck, or a stop, or the law. It was going to be about putting this man back where Wade Tanner had decided he belonged. Whatever it took, that was when it stopped being a traffic question and became something else. Here's what I need you to understand. Solomon Reed had a law degree from a school whose name you'd recognize. He had argued cases in front of appellate courts. He had a wallet in his pocket with credentials that would have ended this in 4 seconds. He had a phone that, if it rang in the next 20 minutes, would be the United States Marshal Service. He had every tool, every protection, every key to every door. More power on paper than any man in that building, including the one with the badge, and he sat there in a flannel shirt and let Wade Tanner call him boy. Why people ask that? People always ask that. We'll get there. Stay with me. Because the answer is the whole reason this story matters. Out. Tanner said. Now. Solomon slid out of the booth. He stood up slow. Hands visible. The choreography every black father in America teaches every black son. Isaiah came out behind him. And Solomon could feel the heat coming off his brother. Could feel 41 years of swallowed rage pressing against the dam. Iasi. Solomon murmured. Just to him. Ease. Now. Hands where they can see them. We're going to be fine. Outside. Tenabarku. Up against the wall. He marched them out the front door. The bell jingling, that cheerful little jingle. Out onto the gravel lot under a flat white sky. The Silverado sat there gleaming. A semi idled at the edge of the lot. Highway 41 ran past. Empty in both directions. Pine trees on the far side. Copper-colored light, and inside the diner, 8 people came to the windows to watch. Tanner shoved Solomon against the cinder block wall of the copper kettle. Warm, rough block against his cheek. The deputy kicked his feet apart. Wider than he needed to. Harder than he needed to. Patted him down rough. Jerking at his pockets. He found the wallet. He pulled it out and flipped it open, and Solomon's heart did a single hard beat. Now it ends. Now he sees it, but Tanner didn't even look. He pulled out the cash. Fanned it. $200 and some Solomon had taken out for gas and his mother's pharmacy. "Where'd you get this kind of money?" Tanner said. "I work." "Doing what?" "I'm a lawyer." Solomon said. Pruitt laughed out loud. An actual bark of laughter. "Head back. He's a lawyer." "Sure. And I'm the governor's nephew. Funny how it's always something," Tanner said, dropping the wallet in the gravel. It fell open in the dust. The credentials inside it, the ones that said who Solomon Reed actually was, lay there in the dirt under the white sky. And nobody read them. You people always got a story. Always a lawyer. Always a brother in the NFL. Always somebody important. Get on the truck. Both of you. Hands on the hood. This is the part I want you to sit with. His identification was on the ground. The truth was right there in the dirt between them. And it didn't matter, because Wade Tanner wasn't confused about who Solomon was. He didn't need information. He'd already decided. Information was never going to change a single thing. And Solomon, who had spent his whole career watching exactly this, watching truth lie on the ground, while a badge stepped over it, understood that better than any man alive. He put his hands on the hood. The metal was warm from the sun. His cheek had block dust on it. His father's watch was on the seat 18 inches away through the window glass. Frozen at 11:42. And Solomon Reed stood spread-eagle against his own truck, while a deputy ran rough hands down his legs and called him an animal. And somewhere in the city, a marble courtroom was filling up with people waiting for him to come be sworn in. Isaiah Reed was a history teacher. He had spent 11 years standing in front of teenagers explaining how injustice worked, not as a feeling, but as a machine. He taught them about black codes, about convict leasing, about sundown towns and the long, ugly architecture of who the law was built to serve. Every February, he told the same students the same thing: evidence is the only thing they can't argue with. When they tell you it didn't happen, you make sure it happened where everyone can see. So when Wade Tanner shoved his brother against the wall, Isaiah Reed did the one thing he'd been training other people's children to do for over a decade. He started recording. His phone was already in his hand. He'd been about to text his wife that they'd stopped to eat. He turned it sideways, low against his hip, and hit record. The lens caught all of it. The gravel, the truck, Solomon's hands on the hood, Tanner's boot between his feet. And the audio caught every single word. "Hey," Pruitt said. "Hey. He's got a phone. Put the phone down." Tanner said, "It's my right to record." Isaiah said. His voice shook, but he kept the camera up. "We're in a public place. I have the right to film a public officer performing his." I said, "Put the phone down." "Boy." Tanner crossed the lot in 3 steps and slapped at Isaiah's hand. The phone went flying, hit the gravel, skidded under the truck, but it kept recording, face up in the dust, half under the Silverado. The camera now pointed at the white sky. But the microphone heard everything. And here's the thing about modern phones that Wade Tanner, 50 years old and proud of not understanding technology, did not know it was backing up. Every second. In real time. To a cloud server, 2,000 miles away. The video was already gone somewhere. He could never reach it. He'd lost the evidence the moment he created it. "There," Tanner said, satisfied. "Now, both of you, hands behind your backs." On what charge? Solomon asked. Still calm. Still facing the hood. Resisting. Tanner pulled Solomon's arms back. Snapped the cuffs on. Ratcheted them tight enough to bite. Obstruction. Interfering with a lawful search. Want some more? I got a whole book. He leaned close to Solomon's ear and dropped his voice to something almost intimate. Almost gentle. The voice of a man saying something he said 100 times and enjoyed every time. You know what your problem is. Your kind never learns its place. Generation after generation, we had this all settled. And people like you just keep showing up where you're not wanted. Running your mouth. Thinking the rules are for everybody. He pulled the cuffs one click tighter. They're not. Out here. I'm the rule. This badge, he tapped Solomon's shoulder with 2 fingers. Right where the badge would be on his own chest. This badge says, I decide who's a citizen today. And today, you're not. Then he cuffed Isaiah, and he marched them both. Hands behind their backs. Across the gravel toward the cruiser. Past the windows of the copper kettle where 8 people stood and watched 2 innocent men get walked to a patrol car. Let me tell you who was at those windows. Darlene, the waitress. With a coffee pot still in her hand. Her knuckles white around the handle. Her mouth half open like she wanted to say something. She didn't. Earl, the cook. In the doorway now. Arms crossed. His face unreadable. The 2 old men in seed caps. Watching over their coffee. One of them shaking his head slowly, but at what? Exactly. You couldn't say. The trucker. Phone up. Filming. Narrating under his breath to nobody. A young mother who'd come in halfway through with a toddler on her hip. Who had turned the child away from the window so he wouldn't see. And not one of them, not one single soul in that diner opened the door and said that man didn't do anything. 3 cars had driven past Maya Underwood once on a different road in a different story. And every one of them had kept going. And here, 50 years and 1 county over, a diner full of people stood at the glass and made the same choice the country always seems to make. They watched. They recorded. They turned their children away, and they let it happen. Man, you want to know the part that keeps me up at night? It was never just the deputy. It was the 8 people at the window. It's always the 8 people at the window. Tanner shoved Solomon's head down and folded him into the back of the cruiser. Then Isaiah. Beside him. The doors slammed. The cage smelled like old sweat and disinfectant, and the particular despair of every person who'd been put back there before. Pruitt got behind the wheel. Tanner stood outside a moment, leaning on the open driver's door, calling it in on his shoulder radio. Lazy and amused. Yeah. Dispatch. Tana. Got 2 in custody off 41 at the Copper Kettle. Resisting. Obstruction. Bringing him in. Oppose. Crackle. Nuff. Nothing major. You know how they get? He laughed at something, the radio said. He was in no hurry. Why would he be? He'd done this 100 times. He'd do it 100 more. It was a Tuesday, in the back seat. Solomon Reed turned his wrist as far as the cuffs would let him and looked at his watch. 9:38. His investiture was at 10 o'clock. 11 miles and 1 interstate exit away. A federal judge was clearing her calendar. A photographer was setting up a tripod. His first assistant, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor named Joan Petrakis, who'd run the office for the 6 months it sat empty. I was probably checking her phone right now, wondering why the new boss hadn't called to confirm. Solomon could end this. Right now, he could lean forward and say 4 words, I am the United States Attorney, and let Pruitt run his name, and watch the blood drain out of both their faces, and be downtown with 10 minutes to spare. He didn't. Isaiah leaned over, his voice a furious whisper. Sol. Tell them right now. You're about to miss your own. No, Solomon said quietly. What do you mean, no? What is wrong with you? I know what I am. Solomon kept his eyes forward. His voice was so low Isaiah had to strain to hear it. I know exactly what I am. Isaiah. That's why I'm not saying it. That makes no sense. It makes all the sense in the world. Solomon turned his head and looked at his brother. And Isaiah stopped. Because there was something in his big brother's eyes he hadn't seen since the funeral. In about an hour, I'm going to raise my right hand and swear to protect the people of this district. All of them. You understand, the ones with credentials in their pocket, and the ones who don't have anything but their own word. He nodded out the window, toward the diner, toward the empty highway, toward the whole rotten country of it. Right now, in this car, I am every man in this county who got put back here on this man's say-so and had nobody coming. That kid he mentioned, the fella with the Silverado, all of them. They didn't have a phone call that ends it. They didn't have a wallet that matters. They had their word against his badge. And their word was never enough. He looked forward again. I want to know exactly what I'm being sworn to fix. I want to feel it in the cuffs. And I want it all on the record. He paused, and there is no record like a man who didn't know who I was. Isaiah stared at his brother, and slowly, the rage in him banked down into something else. Something like awe. Something like grief. Daddy's watch is on the seat. Isaiah said, I know. It stopped at 11:42. I know that too. Outside, Wade Tanner finished his call, slapped the roof of the cruiser twice, and walked around to the passenger side. What none of them knew, not Tanner, not Pruitt, not the 8 people at the window, was that justice was already on Highway 41. It had left the city 8 minutes ago. It was doing 90 miles an hour with the flashers on, and it was bringing 12 men with badges of its own. Here's how it started. Downtown, while 2 brothers sat in a cage on the side of a highway, at 9:32, Joan Petrakis called Solomon Reed's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She frowned. Solomon Reed did not miss calls. The man answered emails at 4 in the morning. She tried again at 9:35. Voicemail at 9:40. The federal judge's clerk called her to ask if everything was on schedule at 9:41. Joan Petrakis did something that, in hindsight, saved the whole morning. The United States Marshal's Service provides protection to federal prosecutors and judges, and a brand new United States attorney, a high-profile, racially historic, politically sensitive appointment comes with a protective detail on the day he's sworn in. That detail had been told Solomon would drive himself in from visiting his mother and would meet them at the courthouse at 9:45. It was 9:41. He wasn't answering. He wasn't there. Now, a normal person being 20 minutes late is nothing. But Joan Petrakis had spent 20 years as a federal prosecutor, and she knew the math that civilians don't. A newly confirmed United States attorney, with a security detail assigned, going completely dark and unreachable on the morning of his investiture is not a scheduling problem. It is a security event. It is the kind of thing that, if it turns out to be real and you ignored it, ends careers and worse. She called the Chief Deputy United States Marshal directly. I can't reach Reed, she said. He's not answering. He should have checked in. The Chief Deputy United States Marshal was a woman named Patricia Hale, 22 years in the service. She did not panic, and she did not wait. She pulled up the location data on the government-issued phone. Solomon had been given the week before the one in his jacket pocket, currently sitting in a garment bag in the back of a cuffed man's truck. The last ping put it 11 miles out, on Highway 41. At a commercial address, the Copper Kettle Diner. Why is he stopped at a diner in Tillman County? Hale said to nobody. She didn't know. But the rule, when you don't know, is you go. You go fast and you go heavy and you apologize later if it was nothing. At 9:43, 6 black Suburbans pulled out of the federal courthouse motor pool. 12 Deputy United States Marshals. Patricia Hale in the lead vehicle. Joan Petrikis, who refused to be left behind. In the second, they went out onto the interstate, and they did not slow down. So while Wade Tanner was calling dispatch and laughing about how they get, a convoy of the United States government was already on the highway, closing the distance. 11 miles. 10. 9. Because a federal officer had gone silent, and protocol does not care whether the reason is an assassination or a plate of biscuits and gravy. It cares that the United States Attorney is unaccounted for. At the Copper Kettle, Tanner climbed into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. All right, Cody, let's get these two booked and get some lunch. Pruitt put the cruiser in gear. That was when the first SUV came over the hill. You see them before you hear them. That's the thing. A black Suburban cresting a rise on a country highway. Dust and heat shimmer behind it. Doing 90. Then a second one in its draft. Then a third. Then all 6. Nose to tail. A black snake of American steel pouring down Highway 41 with their grills lit up red and blue and white. Pruitt's foot came off the gas. The hell is that? He said. Tanner sat up. The convoy didn't pass. It slowed. It signaled 6 government vehicles signaling in formation. A thing you do not ever see. And it turned, one after another, into the gravel lot of the Copper Kettle Diner. Fanning out, boxing in the cruiser, throwing up a wall of dust that drifted across the windshield. Inside the diner, Darlene dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the floor. Nobody looked. The doors of the Suburbans opened all at once, and United States Marshals stepped out onto the gravel. 12 of them. Tactical vests. Sidearms. The gold star. The calm, coordinated movement of people who have done this drill 1,000 times. They moved into position around the lot, around the diner, around the patrol car. Fast and silent. From the second vehicle, a woman in a sharp dark suit got out and stood with one hand on the open door. Scanning. From the lead vehicle came a tall woman, silver at the temples, a gold star on her belt and authority in every line of her. And she walked straight toward the Tillman County cruiser, like the laws of physics were going to get out of her way. Wade Tanner got out of the passenger seat, hand on his own weapon. His sunburned face had gone a strange color. What in God's name is this, he said. Who? Chief Deputy United States Marshal Patricia Hale. She held up her credentials. Flat. In front of his face. And her voice was a blade. Federal officers, step away from that vehicle. This is my stop. Tanner's voice cracked up an octave. This is Tillman County. You don't got jurisdiction to come rolling onto. Deputy. Hale didn't raise her voice. She lowered it, which was worse. I have reason to believe a protected federal official is at this location. You are going to open that cruiser, and you are going to do it now, or I am going to have one of my marshals open it for you. In the back seat, Solomon Reed closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them, and he leaned forward, and he turned his cuffed body so his face was visible through the cage and the window glass. And Patricia Hale saw him. He watched her see him. He watched 22 years of training collide with what her eyes were telling her, that the United States Attorney for the district, the man whose photograph was in the briefing folder on her dashboard, the man she had been sworn that morning to protect, was sitting handcuffed in the back of a Tillman County Sheriff's cruiser with cinderblock dust on his cheek. Her face did something Solomon had never seen a federal marshal's face do. Open the door, she said, and now there was volume in it. Open that door right now. On whose? Hale turned to the nearest marshal. Get him out. 2 marshals moved to the cruiser. Pruit, white as paper, scrambled out of the driver's seat and fumbled the back door open before they could reach it. His hands shaking so badly, he dropped his keys. The door swung wide. A marshal leaned in. Sir, he said to Solomon. Are you injured? I'm Fina. Solomon said, Can you tell me your name? Sir, Solomon Reed. The marshal looked back at Hale and gave a single small nod that meant it's him, and Patricia Hale turned and looked at Wade Tanner. And in the most level voice in the world, she said the sentence that ended his life, as he'd known it. Deputy, the man you have in handcuffs is the Honorable Solomon Reed. He is the United States Attorney for this district. He was confirmed by the United States Senate 11 days ago. She looked at her watch. He is, as of right now, 8 minutes late for the ceremony, where he was supposed to be sworn into that office. And you put him in a cage on the side of the road. Silence, a whole world of it. I want you to picture Wade Tanner's face. Picture 14 years of certainty. 14 years of, I am the rule out here. 14 years of a badge that meant he could do anything to anybody, and write whatever he wanted. Afterward, picture all of that draining out of a man's face in real time. Like water out of a cracked basin. First the bluster, then the color, then the very thing behind his eyes. The thing that had let him kick a man's feet apart and call him an animal on a Tuesday morning. Gone. All that was left was a fat, sunburned deputy in a parking lot full of federal officers. Holding the keys to handcuffs he never should have closed. That's that. Kent Tanner's mouth moved. He didn't say nothing. He didn't tell me who he... You didn't ask. Did you? Hale said, behind Tanner. Cody Pruitt had sat down. Just sat down. Right there on the gravel. His back against the cruiser tire. Like his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him up. He kept saying something under his breath. It took a second to make out. He was saying, "Oh God. Oh God. Oh God." A marshal stepped to Solomon and unlocked the cuffs. They came off with that small mechanical click. And Solomon brought his arms around in front of him slowly, rolling his wrists. The angry red lines where the steel had bitten standing out against his skin. The other marshal freed Isaiah, who got out of the cruiser and stood there in the dust. 6'2" of trembling fury and relief. Staring at the deputies like he didn't trust himself to speak, Solomon Reed stepped out onto the gravel. He didn't lunge at anybody. He didn't yell. He bent down, and he picked up his wallet out of the dirt where Tanner had dropped it. And he brushed it off, and he put it in his pocket. Then he reached into the open door of his truck and he picked up the handkerchief. And he unwrapped his father's watch. And he held it in his palm, and then in front of the marshals, in front of the deputies, in front of the 8 people who had crowded into the doorway of the Copper Kettle to watch Solomon Reed, did something nobody understood at the time. He wound the watch. He turned the little crown between his thumb and finger, the way he did every morning, winding the spring of a clock that had been broken and frozen at 11:42 for 46 years. And he held it up to his ear, the way his father used to. Then he looked at Wade Tanner, and he spoke for the first time as the man he actually was. "I tried to tell you I was a lawyer," Solomon said. His voice carried. He didn't make it carry. It just did. The trained voice of a man who'd spent a career being listened to. The marshals went still. The diner went still. Even the semi at the edge of the lot seemed to quiet its engine. I said it twice. Once at the booth, and once with my face against my own truck. He held up his wrist, the red welt of the cuff. You laughed. Your partner there said he was the governor's nephew. You threw my wallet in the dirt, and everything you needed to know about who I was in that wallet, lying right there at your feet. You stepped over it. He let that sit. You stepped over the truth, deputy, because you'd already decided you didn't need it. You decided who I was the second I walked through that door. And no fact in the world was going to change your mind. Tanner said nothing. There was nothing to say. Now, Solomon went on, I want to tell you why I let you put me in that car. He looked, for a moment, at the diner, at the windows, at the faces. It wasn't to trap you. I didn't know those marshals were coming. I figured I'd spend the morning getting booked in your jail, and miss my own swearing in, and sort it out by lunch. I was prepared to do that. He turned the watch over in his hand. I let you do it because for 14 years, you have been doing it to people who didn't have anyone coming for them. You mentioned a man with a Silverado. You said you know how they get. How many? Deputy, how many men have you put in that cage on a Tuesday and written up resisting and obstruction and watched, pleaded out because they were too poor and too tired and too scared to fight a man with a badge? How many of them were telling the truth on the side of this road? The way I was telling the truth on the side of this road. And nobody believed them either. His voice never rose. That was the terrible thing. It never rose once. I'm about to take an oath to protect every person in this district. And I wanted to know, I wanted to feel what that protection is actually worth on Highway 41 when the man wearing it is the one breaking it. He looked Tanner dead in the eye. Now I know. I felt it in the cuffs. So did my brother. So did every person standing at that window who didn't say a word. Isaiah had retrieved his phone from under the truck. He held it up now. Still recording. The little red dot still burning. And it's all on here. Isaiah said. His voice shook with something fierce and bright. Every word. From get your hands where I can see them. Boy. To right now. It's already backed up. You can't reach it. It's already gone where you can never get to it. He almost laughed. You spent 14 years out here making sure it was always your word against ours. And this morning, you did it on camera. To the one man in the state whose word was going to be louder than yours. Solomon turned to Patricia Hale, Chief Deputy Marshal. I'd like a moment. And then I think I'm late for an appointment. Yes. Sir. Hale said, and the sir in her mouth, directed at the man who 2 minutes ago had been in handcuffs, landed on Wade Tanner like a slap. Then Solomon Reed did the last thing. He walked over to Tanner close, but not threatening. A man, and he said something quiet. Just for him. The way Tanner had leaned in close to say something quiet just for Solomon a few minutes before in the back of the cruiser. But where Tanner's words had been venom, Solomon's were a sentence. You told me, Solomon said softly, that out here, your badge decided who was a citizen that day. You said today I wasn't one. He held up the watch. Frozen, no more ticking now. Faintly, in his palm, the spring, he'd wound, finally turning the gears for the first time in 46 years. My father carried this watch. A Tillman County deputy broke it across his ribs in 1979 and wrote it up as resisting arrest. Insuffisante évidence. He died without his day. I've carried it broken my whole life. He closed his fingers around it. It's running now. Deputy. After 46 years, the clock is finally running. And starting today, it runs for everybody. He stepped back. Chief Deputy Hale. This man assaulted 2 citizens, conducted an unlawful search and seizure, fabricated charges, and made false statements on a police radio, all of which is recorded. I'm going to recuse my office from any prosecution arising from this incident. For obvious reasons. But I want the Civil Rights Division notified before I'm sworn in. Not after. Before. I want it to be the first official act associated with my name. It's already done. Sir, said Joan Petrakis, stepping forward from the second vehicle, phone in hand. She'd been on it the whole time. I made the call while we were on the highway. Solomon nodded once. Then he reached into the back seat, took the garment bag with his suit in it. slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the federal vehicles, leaving Wade Tanner standing in a parking lot full of United States Marshals with the keys to a pair of handcuffs in his hand and nothing at all left in his eyes. Man, imagine spending your whole life sure that the badge was the law, and finding out, on a random Tuesday, over a plate of bacon, that you just put the actual law in a cage. On camera, 8 minutes before he raised his hand to run it. It happened fast, the way these things do. Once the floor gives way, right there on the gravel, before anyone left the lot, 2 marshals walked Wade Tanner to the hood of his own cruiser. A Tillman County supervisor was called. Within the hour before lunch, the lunch Tanner had been so casual about Wade Tanner's badge and service weapon were taken from him on the side of Highway 41. Cody Pruitt's too. They surrendered them in the gravel, in front of the diner, in front of the windows, in the exact place where they had decided 2 innocent men were animals. The badge that had made Wade Tanner untouchable for 14 years sat in a marshal's gloved palm under the white sky. Small, dull, a piece of stamped metal that used to mean a man could do anything. It didn't mean anything now. The video went up that night. Isaiah Reed didn't post it himself. He gave it to a lawyer, and the lawyer gave it to the Civil Rights Division. And somewhere in the chain, a copy reached a journalist. The same way the truth always seems to find a crack to get through. By the next morning it was on every station in the state. By the morning after that it was national. Get your hands where I can see them. Boy, 8 words. Spoken by a man in a uniform to a man eating breakfast. Followed by the reveal that the man he'd called boy was the Chief Federal Prosecutor of the entire district. Late for his own swearing-in because he was sitting in handcuffs. The internet did what the internet does. It caught fire. The clip of Patricia Hale saying the man you have in handcuffs is the United States Attorney for this district played on a loop on cable news. The clip of Solomon Reed winding his father's watch, though nobody watching knew what the watch was, became a thing people couldn't explain but couldn't stop sharing. A black man in a flannel shirt, calmly turning a little brass crown in a parking lot full of federal agents. And the phrase that stuck, the one that ended up on signs and shirts, and the bottom of every news broadcast, was 4 words pulled straight from the dignity of the man himself. The wrong man. That's what they wrote. They cuffed the wrong man. It was on cardboard outside the Tillman County Sheriff's Office, within 48 hours. It was a hashtag for a week. But the thing about the wrong man is the question buried inside it. The question that made people uncomfortable in a way they couldn't shake. If he was the wrong man, then who was the right one? Who was Wade Tanner allowed to do this to? Who did he do it to? All those years. And we never made a sign for any of them. That question is the whole point. Hold on to it. The county tried to get out in front of it. They always try, 48 hours after the diner. Before the federal subpoenas landed, the Tillman County Board of Supervisors put a man behind a podium with the county seal on it and a prepared statement in his hands. He was a county spokesman, soft and nervous, sweating under the lights. And he read the words somebody had written for him in a back room. The county takes these allegations seriously. Deputy Tanner has been placed on administrative leave pending review. The Tillman County Sheriff's Office does not condone discrimination in any form. He took 2 questions and then stopped taking questions. Because the first reporter asked him whether the sheriff's office had received prior complaints about Wade Tanner. And the second reporter asked him to say, on camera, the name of even one of the people Wade Tanner had stopped in 14 years. He couldn't answer either one. He walked off the stage with his shirt soaked through. And the clip of him walking off unable to name a single person, unable to say a single word, played almost as much as the diner footage did. Because that, too, was the story. A whole county that had a system for not knowing. A whole county that had spent 14 years making sure it never had to learn anybody's name. Then there was the lawyer, The police union kept a lawyer on retainer for exactly these situations. A smooth, gray-suited man named Hollis Beck, who had spent 30 years making problems like Wade Tanner go away. He'd done it dozens of times. A complaint, a deposition, a quiet settlement, a record sealed. Beck knew the moves the way other men know their own driveway. When the union called him about the Tanner case, he reviewed the file in 20 minutes and told them what he always told them: open and shut. Hollis Beck said, "Deputy made a lawful stop. The rest is a personnel matter. We'll be done by the fall." Then somebody sent him the video. He watched it once. Then he watched it again. Slower, because he didn't believe what he'd seen the first time: the wallet in the dirt. The credentials lying right there. The federal motorcade coming over the hill. The man in the flannel shirt who turned out to be the most powerful prosecutor in the district. Hollis Beck had spent 30 years betting that it would always be the deputy's word against some forgotten drivers. He had never, in 3 decades, lost that bet. He withdrew from the case 3 weeks later. No statement. He told the union he had a conflict. What he had was a calculation. The cold, silent arithmetic of a man who had just watched the only thing that ever protected his clients, the certainty that no one important was watching burn to the ground on national television. His firm's website was updated within the month. He'd moved to estate planning, wills and trusts, quiet work where nobody's word ever had to be enough. Because there was always a signature on a piece of paper, the federal investigation did not stay small. Within a week, agents from the Civil Rights Division were in Tillman County. And they did not come for a conversation. They came with subpoenas, shift logs, stop records, complaint files. Every document the sheriff's office had spent years burying under the same 3 rubber-stamped words, and what they found was worse than what happened to Solomon Reed, because Solomon Reed had a motorcade. Solomon Reed had marshals on the highway and a first assistant on the phone, and a name the whole country now knew. The people the investigators started finding had none of that. They had only their word. And their word had been thrown in the dirt years ago. Just like Solomon's wallet, there was Keisha Monroe, 26 now, 4 years ago, fresh out of high school. She'd been pulled over by Wade Tanner on Highway 41, on her way to a nursing program interview. He'd searched her car, found nothing, gotten angry that there was nothing, and arrested her for obstruction when she asked why. She'd been so afraid of a felony that she pleaded to a misdemeanor on the advice of a public defender who told her fighting a deputy's word was throwing money in a fire. The conviction failed her on the program's background check. She lost the seat. She was working a register at a dollar store when the investigators called. "I told everybody he made it up," she said, crying. "My mama believed me. Nobody else did." There was Deacon Calvin Pope, 68. A deacon at a church Cornelius Reed had once preached at. As it happened, the South is a small place. 3 years back, Wade Tanner had pulled him over and, when Pope reached too slow for his registration, had made him get out and kneel on the shoulder of the highway while he searched the truck. A 65-year-old deacon, on his knees on the asphalt, in front of cars full of people he knew from church. "He just wanted me down there," Pope told the agents, and his hands shook the whole time. The way Cornelius Reed's hands used to shake. He didn't need to search anything. He wanted to see a black man on his knees on the side of the road. That's all it ever was. There was a teenager named Marquis Tillery, who'd been 17 when Tanner cited him for resisting after a stop, that the dash cam when they finally pulled it showed lasted 90 seconds and involved a boy doing nothing but sitting in a car with his hands on the wheel. There were more. The investigators counted, in the end, a pattern stretching back 9 years, 241 documented stops by Wade Tanner on that one corridor of Highway 41. And 198 of them, better than 8 in 10, were of black or Hispanic drivers. in a county where those drivers were barely a third of the population. Falsified reports. Searches without cause. Charges that existed only to make a person plead. When the analysts plotted every stop on a map of the county, the red dots clustered so thick along that 12-mile stretch of road that it stopped looking like a map and started looking like a wound. And, most damning, a paper trail showing that Sheriff Garrett Pike had received complaint after complaint about Wade Tanner, and had closed every one of them with the same 3 words: insuffisante évidence. Closed, the same 3 words that had been stamped on Cornelius Reed's complaint in 1979. The machine hadn't broken. The machine had worked exactly as it was built to work, as a wall between the badge and the truth. Generation after generation. The same words. The same silence. The same, kneeling on the same asphalt, under the same white sky. Solomon Reed did one thing during the investigation that he didn't tell anyone about, and that the cameras never caught. He drove out, alone, one evening to a small frame house outside Pell Creek, and he sat on the porch with Deacon Calvin Pope for 2 hours. He wasn't there as the United States Attorney. He'd recused his office. He couldn't be there as that. He was there as Cornelius Reed's son, sitting with a man who'd known his father. 2 men in rocking chairs while the light went copper and then gray over the pines. Pope told him about the kneeling, about the church people who drove past, about how, for 3 years, he'd stopped driving that road at all, would go 20 minutes out of his way rather than risk it. An old deacon rerouting his whole life around the memory of a deputy. I never told anybody it bothered me. Pope said, "What's the point? They protect their own. I figured I'd just carry it. My daddy carried his for 19 years. Solomon said, he had a watch the man broke. Wouldn't fix it. Said he liked the reminder. Pope was quiet a while. Did you fix it? I did. Solomon said, after the diner, I wound it on the side of the road and it started running, and I figured he stopped. He wasn't a man who said much, and this was already more than he usually said. I figured it was time it ran. Pope nodded slowly. The 2 of them rocked in the dark, and after a while the old deacon said the thing Solomon would carry for the rest of his own life. The thing that mattered more than the indictments and the consent decree and the 4 words on the cardboard signs. Then maybe mine can stop now. Pope said, maybe I can put it down. If somebody finally heard it. Somebody heard it. Solomon said, that's what this was always about. Not the punishment of one cruel man. The unburdening of all the people who'd been told, for 100 years, to just carry it, and who'd carried it. In silence. Because nobody with the power to change it had ever once been made to listen. The reckoning, when it came, was total. Wade Tanner was indicted on federal charges under Title 18 of the United States Code. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Multiple counts. He surrendered to federal custody in the same parking lot of the Tillman County Courthouse, where he'd once strutted in like he owned it. And the cameras that caught his perp walk played it next to the diner footage. The before and the after. The man who decided who was a citizen, and the man being walked in chains. Cody Pruitt cooperated. He was younger, weaker, and terrified. And he told the investigators everything. The casual cruelty. The things Tanner had taught him. The reports they'd written together. His cooperation kept him out of a federal prison. But it didn't keep his badge. He would never wear a uniform again. Anywhere. For the rest of his life. Sheriff Garrett Pike was the bigger fish. And the harder one. He'd been careful. He'd never thrown a punch or thrown a wallet. He'd just signed his name under 3 words. Thousands of times. And let the wall stand. But careful isn't the same as clean. And the Civil Rights Division built a case for obstruction and for a pattern of Pike resigned before they finished. He was indicted 3 months later. The county that had elected him 4 times stopped saying his name. 6 convictions were overturned. 6 people, black men and women who had pleaded guilty to things they did not do because they could not afford to fight a decorated deputy and a sheriff who would always back him, had their records wiped clean. Keisha Monroe was one of them. She reapplied to the nursing program the week the letter came. She got in. She called Isaiah. Of all people, she'd seen him in the news. The brother with the phone, the teacher, and she could barely get the words out. They cleared it. She said, "It's gone. My record's clean." And Isaiah Reed, who had spent 11 years teaching other people's children that evidence is the only thing they can't argue with, sat down in his classroom after the bell and put his head in his hands and cried. Because for once in the long, ugly history of it, the evidence had won. But here is the part that mattered most. The part that makes this a black stories and not just a revenge story. It didn't stop with the men. Solomon Reed. Sworn in at last, he took the oath that same afternoon. 4 hours late. Still in the flannel shirt. The coffee stain from the diner dried brown across the front of it. Refusing to change because his suit had ridden in a cuffed man's truck, and he wanted history to see exactly what they'd done to him before he raised his hand. Solomon Reed did not make Wade Tanner the story. He made the machine the story. His office, working with the Civil Rights Division, opened a formal pattern or practice review of the entire Tillman County Sheriff's Office. Not one bad deputy. The whole structure. The complaint system that worked like a firewall. The training that taught men to measure a person by the door they walked through. The supervisors who signed the 3 words. They found what they always find when somebody finally looks, that Wade Tanner was not a glitch in the system. He was the system, functioning as designed. The result was a consent decree. Court-enforced reform. The first in the county's history. Mandatory body cameras. Always on. With automatic upload to a server, no deputy could reach the same technology that had saved Solomon. Made law. An independent civilian review board. With subpoena power. The first time in Tillman County that the people the deputies stopped got to sit in judgment of how they were stopped. Quarterly audits of every traffic stop. Broken down by race. Published where anyone could read them. And a new training requirement for every deputy in the county. A module they all had to pass. Titled, Constitutional Policing and the Cost of the Badge. The first slide of that module is a photograph of Highway 41 at dawn. The stretch of road outside a diner called the Copper Kettle. The place where, for 14 years, a man believed the rules didn't apply to him, and where, one Tuesday morning over breakfast, he found out they did. 6 weeks after the diner, Isaiah Reed stood in front of his 9th grade American history class. He'd asked Keisha Monroe to come, and Deacon Pope, who'd said yes before Isaiah finished the question. They sat in the back of the room in folding chairs while 30 14-year-olds filed in, loud and bored and texting under their desks. The way 14-year-olds are, Isaiah didn't start with a lecture. He started with the video. He'd gotten permission from his brother, from the lawyers, from Keisha and Deacon Pope, who both wanted it shown. He played it on the smartboard. The whole thing. Get your hands where I can see them. Boy. The hood of the truck. The cuffs. The wallet in the dirt. The black SUVs coming over the hill. And the room of teenagers who had been on their phones, slowly put their phones down, on, until it was completely silent, and 30 kids were watching a deputy put their teacher's brother in a cage on the side of a road. When it ended, a girl in the second row said, "That's Mr. Reed's brother. That's my brother," Isaiah said, and he was, like the boss of the whole, he was the lawyer-in-chief, United States Attorney, the most powerful prosecutor in this district, and that deputy put him in handcuffs because he decided a black man eating breakfast was a criminal. Isaiah let that land. Now I want you to think about something. My brother had a motorcade. 12 federal marshals came over that hill for him. You saw it. He gestured to the back of the room. Miss Monroe back there, same deputy. Same road. She didn't have a motorcade. She had her word. And for 4 years, her word wasn't enough. And she lost a career she'd earned. For a crime she didn't commit. He walked to the front of the board and wrote 4 words. Evidence is everything. They have always told us it didn't happen. Isaiah said, when they break a man's ribs, they write resisting arrest. When they put a deacon on his knees, they write non-compliant. When they put my brother in a cage, they wrote obstruction. For 100 years, it was always their word against ours. And their word had a badge on it. He tapped the board. But you live in a time when you can make it happen where everyone can see. That phone in your pocket that I'm always taking away from you. It is the most powerful weapon for justice anybody in this room owns. My brother understood that. The deputy didn't, because he was 50 years old and proud of not understanding anything. A few kids laughed. Don't ever be proud of not understanding. You hear me, record? Witness. Make it happen where they can't deny it. And when you see it happening to somebody who doesn't have a phone up, you be the one with the phone up. He looked at the back of the room. At Keisha Monroe, who was about to start nursing school. And at Deacon Pope, whose hands didn't shake quite as bad as they used to. Because the part of this nobody wants to talk about, Isaiah said, more quietly now, is that 8 people were sitting in that diner. 8 grown adults watched the whole thing through the window. Some of them recorded it, and not one of them opened the door and said that man didn't do anything. He looked at his students. Don't be the people at the window. In your whole life, that's the choice you'll have to make over and over. Don't be the people at the window. Let me tell you how it ended for the rest of them. Darlene, the waitress who dropped the coffee pot, she testified. Voluntarily. She drove to the federal building and gave a statement about everything she'd seen and heard. And at the end of it, she said something the prosecutor wrote down word for word. I should have said something in there. I've been carrying it ever since. I've got a son. I'd want somebody to say something for him. It wasn't redemption. It was just a tired woman doing. A little too late. The thing she wished she'd done in time. But the agent said you could tell she'd never not do it again. Sometimes that's all you get. Sometimes that has to be enough. The copper kettle changed hands within the year. The new owner put up a small sign by the register. It just says, everyone gets served. Everyone gets respected. No exceptions. Earl the cook still works the griddle. He doesn't measure people at the door anymore. He says he can't. After what he saw, he says the look on that man's face when he wound that little watch is something he'll take to his grave. Eunice Reed lived to see it. That was the gift in all of it. Solomon's dying mother, 81 years old, slipping away one function at a time in a low brick building under a magnolia tree. She lived long enough. 3 weeks after the diner, the federal courthouse held a formal ceremonial swearing in. The real one. The one with the robes and the photographer and the room full of people. And in the front row, in a wheelchair, with an oxygen line under her nose and her good church hat on her head, sat Eunice Reed. She watched her son raise his right hand. She watched the first black United States attorney in the history of that district swear to defend the Constitution and the laws of a country that had broken her husband's ribs and his watch and his heart, and stamped 3 words on his pain, and let him die without his day. And in his suit pocket, against his heart, Solomon Reed carried his father's watch. It was running. He'd had it cleaned. Finally not repaired. Just cleaned. The hands freed. The spring he'd wound on that gravel lot finally allowed to turn. It kept perfect time now. When the judge finished, when the room stood and applauded, When Eunice Reed reached up from her wheelchair with a shaking hand and her son bent down so she could touch his face. The watch ticked quietly between them, no longer frozen at 11:42. No longer stopped on the worst night of the family's history, 46 years late. But running, justice in this country runs slow. Boys, that's what Cornelius Reed used to say, holding up a broken watch. Slow as cold molasses. But it runs. You make sure it runs. His son made it run. Solomon Reed went back to work the way he did everything quietly. No victory lap. The watch sits on his desk now, ticking, where he can see it. He prosecutes civil rights cases. He sends his people into counties like Tillman to look for the next Wade Tanner, the next sheriff signing the next 3 words, the next man on his knees on the side of a road with nobody coming. Because the truth Solomon Reed learned in the back of that cruiser is the truth. This whole story is built on. He got justice because he had a motorcade. Most people don't have a motorcade. And that's the question this story leaves on the table. The one I can't put down. The one I need you to sit with tonight. What does it say about a country where a black man needs 12 federal marshals to come over a hill before anyone will believe he was telling the truth on the side of the road? What does it say that Solomon Reed's word wasn't enough, that even his word, the word of the Chief Federal Prosecutor, only mattered once the United States government came roaring up Highway 41 to back it? And if that's what it took for him, then what about everyone who doesn't get a motorcade? That's the part that should keep all of us up at night. Not the deputy. We know what the deputy is. The deputy is easy. It's the 8 people at the window. It's the question of whether, when it happens in front of you, and it will happen in front of you, you'll be one of the people who recorded it and stayed silent. Or the one who opened the door. So let me ask you, straight up, before you go, have you ever been treated like a suspect for the crime of just existing? Have you ever been looked at, measured at a door, decided about before anybody knew your name, and then watched the truth get thrown in the dirt while a badge stepped right over it? I want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me about the time you were the wrong person to underestimate. And tell me, be honest, about the time you were one of the people at the window. Because we've all been there too. And the only way we stop being there is by saying it out loud. If this story hit you the way it hit me, share it. Send it to somebody who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because stories like this one, the ones about dignity and silence, and the long, slow running of justice in this country, they don't tell themselves. And one more time, the thing I keep coming back to, 8 people stood at that window. Some of them filmed it. Not one of them opened the door. Be the one who opens the door.